Hello and welcome to the First Unitarian Church. My name is Stephen Storla. Our program this evening is sponsored by Northwest Veg and by two groups at the church, Unitarian Universalist Animal Ministry and Community for Earth. At our church, animal advocacy and environmental activism are integral elements of our social justice work. After the talk, there will be a question and answer period, followed by a reception with vegan food and beverages in the Channing Room. That is close by in this building, in this corner of the building, and you can get there by going out these side doors or the back door and turn right before you would exit the building. At the reception, you can have a chance to speak with Dr. Rao and to learn more about Northwest Veg and about the First Unitarian Church. Introducing our speaker this evening is Jacqueline Leeds, Executive Director of Northwest Veg. Please join me in welcoming Jacqueline.
Thanks so much for coming, and a big thanks to the Animal Ministry and Community for Earth for putting so much work into organizing this event as well as hosting us this evening. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Sailesh Rao. He is an electrical engineer by training, and he's the executive director of Climate Healers, a nonprofit founded in 2007. And I imagine that he will tell you more about Climate Healers, but their mission is to reforest ice-free land to neutralize carbon dioxide emissions from humans. He is the author of 2 books, and he is extremely accomplished in working with other NGOs, other tribes in India, and other groups to bring solar-powered stoves to India in lieu of wood stoves. In a society where we find it increasingly challenging to relate to others that have different perspectives, I am extremely inspired by the way that Dr. Rao frames his narrative. He uses his personal story to share how we can reframe commonly held stories, and he does so through this paradigm of metamorphosis, a way to educate people without shaming, to show how we can transform each other together as equals. So I hope that you enjoy Dr. Rao's talk as much as I have in the past. And welcome, thank you for being here, Dr. Rao.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for this hospitality. As Jacqueline said, I'm going to tell you stories. And the reason I tell you stories is because that's how we, as human beings, work together. Because every one of us is unique. Every one of us bring our own unique gifts. In fact, everything in nature is unique. And this is why we tell stories, to make sense of reality. So the stories I'm going to tell you are going to be shaped by my life experiences. And I'm going to begin by telling you why I even called my nonprofit Climate Healers. Because healing is about reversing the disease. It's about making something whole, that which has been broken. So I was shocked when I saw Al Gore's presentation on TV in 2005. I was a systems engineer working on 10 gigabit Ethernet at that time. And I said to my wife, if half of what he's saying is true, what is everybody doing? They should all be working on this full time. So I said, I have to study this problem, and I'll let you know within 3 months what I should be doing in my life. And so within 3 months, I realized that it was far worse than what Mr. Gore had said. So I asked my wife permission to close down our company so that I can focus on this full time. And we did that. Then I wrote to Mr. Gore and I said, how can I help you? And he asked me to come and get trained by him as part of his climate project training. So I got trained by him in November of 2006. And I went around giving his presentation for 1 year like I had promised I would do. And all along I had this dissatisfaction with the way we were framing climate change. Because there was something wrong. I like to use the analogy of a patient who goes to a doctor with a persistent mild fever and a lump the size of a coconut by the side of his head. The doctor examines him and he says that the lump is cancerous and it's causing you a fever. I'm going to prescribe you Tylenol so that as the lump grows, your fever does not go over 2 degrees Celsius. Would you as a patient at that point say, can you please make sure that as the lump grows, my temperature doesn't go over 1.5 degrees Celsius? Or would you say, can you take care of my problem? I don't want to have a fever. But that's exactly how our world leaders have been dealing with climate change for the last 30, 40 years. In 1992, after the Rio summit, there were 3 conventions formed at the UN. There were 3 major problems identified. The first was biodiversity loss. The second was ecosystems collapse. And the third was climate change. So they formed 3 conventions: the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. How often do we ever hear about the first 2? But we keep track of the fever, the climate change. And we argue about whether to give the patient Tylenol or no Tylenol. But we are all complicit in this. Because one of the things that I found out in COP21 in Paris, one of the negotiators came out and spoke to me because I was wearing a t-shirt that caught her attention. And she said, nobody wants to talk about what you have on your t-shirt. She said, I'm one of the few women among the negotiators, and everybody in there eats meat. And the negotiators were told right from the outset not to mention the C word, consumption. So you wonder, why do we have this silence about something in our society? And anytime you have silence about something, you can be pretty sure that that's where the major problem is. Okay? You'll notice that the title of my talk is a little different from what was advertised, because I'm part of a group called Inspiring the Great Transition. And we have all determined, we are people from all over the world, and we have determined from now on, we are going to keep talking about the Great Transition. Because there's a book by Jeremy Lent that came out recently, a philosopher, and he said that there are 3 possible futures for humanity at the moment. The first future is a complete civilizational collapse. And nobody works for a future like that. The second is what he calls a techno-split, where a few people have access to lots and lots of technology and all the resources of the planet, and the rest have next to nothing. It's an extreme inequality situation. And that is what our current system is headed towards. And the third is the great transition, the great transformation of values. You see, the UN identified 3 major environmental problems. And Gus Speth, who's the Dean of Environmental Studies at Yale University, he said recently that 30 years ago I thought that the 3 major environmental problems on Earth were ecosystems collapse, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And I thought with 30 years of good science, we can solve these problems. I was wrong. The 3 major environmental problems on Earth are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to solve these problems, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do this. It's up to us. I really think the faith community has to come together now to do this. So before I begin, can I ask you how many of you here are vegan? That's amazing. I think you are the highest density of vegans I've ever seen. I was in a school in Marrakesh where I asked 250 high school students, how many of you are vegan? And one child raised his hand. And I could tell that he had to raise his hand because everybody was looking at him. Then I asked them, so how many of you would deliberately hurt an innocent animal unnecessarily? Nobody raised their hands. Then I told them, by definition, all of you are vegan. Because you have compassion in your heart. That's who you are. You are made in the image of God. Except who you are and what you do are not in alignment. And every time that happens, you are suffering. Because that's what suffering originates from, not being in alignment with who we are. So I frame veganism as a journey home to who we really are. Becoming compassionate to all life. And we are all in different places in this journey. And because we are all unique, your place is your place. So you have to find your way home. The best we can do is to help each other as we come home to who we really are. So that's my mission. That's what I've been trying to do. And I'm on a tour. Portland is part of my tour, talking about this great transition. So I want to now tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to do what I'm doing. I want to begin in 1993, when I was living the good life, the American life. I was doing very well. We had just created the first MPEG encoder chip. And it had 60% of the market share at that point. So we bought a big house in New Jersey. And then I bought a brand new car. Because that's what we have been told, that's the story we've been told is going to make us happy. And I bought into it. I bought the car, parked it in the garage, and the next morning, it burnt my house down. So fortunately, we ran out of the house. And then I called the dealer up and I said, "What did you sell me?" And he said, "Oh my God, it happened to you?" So he gave me a number to call. said, talk to this engineer, he will tell you. So I talked to the engineer and he explained to me exactly how it happened. They were trying to fit a V8 engine in a V6 compartment, and in the process they routed something very close. The fuel line was very close to the windshield washer heater, and sometimes the fuel lines leak, and the fumes, they concentrate around the hot heater, and when the ambient temperature goes up, it ignites. So too bad. And he said, yours is the 8th car that caught fire. Headquarters is waiting for 10 before they issue a recall. We are all numbers at this point. See, I realized at the point I was just a number. So the next morning, the automobile manufacturer sends an expert to examine the fire. That expert was an academic, a very respected professor of physics from the University of Pennsylvania. And I could see that this expert was looking at everything except the car. So I told him, Professor, why are you looking at all that? Because I already spoke to Eric and he told me what happened. He said, who told you to talk to Eric? You're not supposed to talk to Eric. And then he went and complained. He said, how can I do my job if people are giving out these numbers? Since then, I couldn't catch Eric on the phone. He just disappeared. And then there was a lawsuit between the manufacturer and the insurance company. It went 4 years. I got to see how corporations work from the inside. And I got to see how they were stuck in that mode of operation. Because if they admitted they had a problem publicly, they would get lots and lots of lawsuits. So they had to pretend they didn't have a problem. Meanwhile, they knew they had a problem and they were working on it inside. And so in the process, lawyers made a lot of money because they were suing each other on both sides. Our house even this house at that time cost about $280,000 to rebuild, but the lawsuit was for $4 million. Okay? So they rebuilt everything for us, except we lost all our photographs and everything. Okay? So it was a reset on my life. And it gave me an insight into how the current system works. And over time, I realized that there was no happiness in this big house. So when it came time for me to work on climate healers, I'm a systems engineer, so I look at it from a systems perspective. So I was looking at the 3 major problems, and so where is the best place to go study these 3 major problems in one spot? So I went to this village in Rajasthan, India, which is on the edge of the Thar Desert. If you look, this is the satellite map of the world, and if you look, this desert starts at the western edge of Africa, goes all the way into India, and becomes the Thar Desert there. It goes all the way into China and becomes the Gobi Desert there. It is one contiguous desert. And if you know your history, right, you know that this is where the major civilizations of the world were. That's where Egyptian civilization, Babylonian civilization, Persian civilization, Indus Valley civilization, Chinese civilization, they were all in this region, and the desert happened. So I went to the edge of this, went to the Thar Desert to study, just to understand what was going on. And to begin with, because I was working in remote regions with the villagers who were very poor, I decided to do a project with them. So I was going to give them solar lights and claim carbon credits for all the kerosene they're not burning, because I knew that they get about 3 liters of kerosene a month from the ration shop. So I did my calculations. If I can get at least $11 a metric ton for carbon credits, I had a sustainable business model where I could just buy more and more lights and deploy to more and more people. So I went to the village. Oops. And within half an hour, my business model fell apart. This is what they say, reality has to meet. I mean, your business model meets reality and then it doesn't survive it. Because the people told me, what lights? What are you talking about, kerosene lights? Why do you want to change the night? God gave us night so we can go to sleep. And then I asked them, what are you using all this kerosene for? And they said, we use it to start our cooking fires. So then I asked them, so how much wood do you burn for cooking? They said 10 kgs a day. So if you do the calculations with 10 kgs a day, 30 days, that's 300 kgs a month. Compared to 3 liters of kerosene, this is a much, much bigger problem. So I asked them, if I give you solar cookers so that you don't have to burn wood, would you use them? They said, sure, show us how to make our food and we'll use them. So that's how I got into the cooking situation. Okay? And the first thing you realize when you work on cooking, it's kind of finicky. Oops. Okay, thanks. There is a lot of social and cultural and health issues surrounding cooking. People have been doing this for 40 years, since 1970. The women who cook with wood live 8 years less than the men on average. It's the opposite of what you'd expect, because they're breathing in all that smoke. So that is the equivalent of breathing 2 packs of cigarettes a day in terms of lifespan. So we analyzed the smoke to see what was in there. And we discovered that the smoke was filled with industrial toxins from all our effluents. It had dioxin, it had furan, benzopyrene, you name it, it is there. Everything that we put up in the air comes down in the rain somewhere and is absorbed by trees. And trees are very good filters. This is nature's way of cleaning up our toxins. So the trees filter the toxins out, store them in their trunks and their branches, so that the water that's transpired from the leaf is as pure as possible. But these women were cutting those trees and burning them. And every year the concentration is increasing, so it's getting worse and worse and worse. So then it occurred to me, if it's in the trees, it should be in the vegetation as well. You see, the reason there is a lot of deforestation and desertification happening in this region is because the vegetation is eaten by livestock or farmed animals, and then we milk the farmed animals and sell the milk to the people in the city. So the biomass from the forest is now disappearing into the city, including the nutrients from the forest. Or we raise goats and then we sell the goats to people in the city to eat. So the biomass from the forest is now, including the nutrients, is disappearing into the city. So over time, we are depleting the forest. When goats finish eating, they leave nothing behind because they even eat the roots. So it becomes a desert. So it was clear that, anything new is eaten by animals or domestic animals, and anything old that is in the forest is being cut down and burnt for firewood. So the forest was being attacked from below and from above, and it was dying. So the people protected 250 acres of this forest. They put this stone fence to prevent animals from going inside, domestic animals from going inside. And in 4 years, it became that. Now, when I used to show these two pictures in my presentations, people would ask me, are you sure they didn't take the first picture during summer and the second picture during winter? Maybe they're fooling you. Maybe this is the way it is. So when I went to the village in 2008, December, I asked them, can you please show me this forest? I want to see it. Okay. So I took this picture of the fence. On the left, animals are allowed to graze, and I could see a lot of old cows walking around eating the grass. And on the right, animals are not allowed to graze, and I immediately went vegan. Because I realized I had been told a story that vegetarianism is just a little bit worse than veganism. So I thought maybe, I'm as good as I could be. I was a vegetarian at that point. But that's an accounting gimmick. Because to get milk out of cows, you have to keep impregnating the cows. And in India, we drink a lot of milk and we don't eat the beef. So the cows all live for 25 years, eating up the forest. So I knew that my impact was worse than someone who's eating an omnivore diet. So I decided to go vegan on the spot. Now, the more I was in the villages working on these things, I realized that things are really bad. Things are getting worse and worse and worse. There are a few places where people are trying to protect some land, but it was being destroyed in other places because we keep growing our economy. That growth. So in 2009, I went to this sanctuary in the Gore district of Karnataka. This was a sanctuary started by a couple from New Jersey. The husband is an Indian and from India, and the wife was an American. So they met in New Jersey, they got married, they went back to India and said, let's do something. So they bought this coffee plantation and they tore down the fences and gave it back to the animals. They let it go. And over time, these animals came and dropped seeds. The birds would come and drop seeds. The elephant would eat a whole jackfruit in the national forest and come and poop the jackfruit in their sanctuary. All the seeds would come out with the manure to create a new jackfruit tree. So over time, this sanctuary is now so dense. The underbrush is so thick, you can only walk where the elephants walked. Because they are the ones who create paths in the forest. And at night, there was such a loud din of insects that I could barely hear my sister talk. So I asked them, what else did you have to do to make this happen? It was just the animals who did this? And Pamela said, no, we had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. And at that point, I felt so small. I felt as if I don't belong on earth because I was born in this forest. So that was the story that we have been told, that we have been telling ourselves, that we don't belong in the forest. We have to get out of there. The civilized land is outside the forest. But we use the forest for our resources. The only reason why people could not be allowed inside the sanctuary was because they see every elephant as a $1,000 bill. Because that's what people want from the elephant. So this is the story of separation that we have been telling ourselves. We have been banished from Eden because we ate the apple. But this story of separation leads to inconsistencies. And anytime there are inconsistencies in our stories, there is something wrong with the stories. What I mean by this is, if you look at Laudato Si, or the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change, or the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change, you can see statements like this, which contradict the axiom that God is all-powerful. If you read these statements, it's as if human beings have suddenly become more powerful than God. You cannot have one and the other. You have to choose one. Is God all-powerful, or are we more powerful than God? If God is all-powerful, then the story of separation must have some flaw in it. Maybe we are not interpreting it right. Can you go back to the previous one? Okay. And then a year later, in 2010, this girl was born. She was born in Phoenix, and I was living in San Francisco at that time. And I noticed that my wife was never home. She would disappear. This is our granddaughter. So when she was about a month old, she told me, you got to go see her because there is something about her, there's something magical about her. And I went to see her. And I held her in my arms for the first time, and I had the exact same feeling of perfection that I had at that sanctuary. She's half South Asian, 1/4 African American, and 1/4 American Indian. She has 3 continents in her. So to me, she was the perfect representation of humanity. And I said, just like those animals lived and the forest returned, flourished, we also must tell a story where we just live as we are and the earth will flourish. We must belong exactly as we are, because she definitely does belong exactly as she is. So I tried to find that story. And I wrote my first book, Carbon Dharma. As soon as I came back from Phoenix, I started writing. I'd been doing a lot of research, and one of the stories that I wanted to share with you is the equivalent of the knowledge tree story in the Bible. There is an equivalent story in the Rig Veda of the Hindus. So the story, in this story, the apple tree is now a fig tree, and the role of Adam and Eve is played by children, and the role of the serpent is played by an uncle. So the story begins with children playing with sticks and stones and rag dolls on the floor of their hut in the middle of the forest. And their uncle comes to visit them. And the uncle says, "Why are you playing with these trifles when the cosmic fig tree is right outside your hut? Go out under the tree and wish for anything you want, and it will give it to you. Then you can be playing with real toys instead of these trifles." The children don't believe him. How can there be a tree where you wish and it gives it to you? This is not the way the universe is built. So they wait until the uncle leaves, and then they rush to the tree and they start wishing. They wish for sweets, and they get them. And they gorge on the sweets and they get stomachache. They wish for toys, and they get them. And they play with the toys and they get bored. Fancier toys lead to greater boredom. There was something about the tree that they did not understand. It grants you what you ask for, and along with it comes the exact opposite. Because that's how the universe is built, of dualities. The children didn't know that. All they knew is that they couldn't stop wishing under the tree, and the more they wished, the more miserable they were. Then they get to be young men and women. And now they're wishing for what young men and women wish for. The 4 main fruits of the tree were sex, fame, money, and power. And with each comes its opposite, And the result was more misery and suffering for the young men and women. Then they get to be old men and women. And they congregate under the tree in 3 different groups. The first group says, we were so happy when we didn't know about this tree. This tree ruined our lives. It has all been a hoax and a farce. And the Rig Veda says they were fools, but they hadn't understood the tree. The second group says, we must have been wishing for all the wrong things. If we could go back and wish for different things, I'm sure we'd have been a lot happier. And the Rig Veda says they were bigger fools, for they understood less than nothing about this tree. And the third group was the most foolish of the lot, but they come under the tree and they say, we are so miserable, we wish we were dead. And the tree grants them the wish, and they're immediately reborn underneath the same tree. Because you see, the tree always grants wishes in dualities. Meanwhile, a lame child had been watching all this from inside the window of the hut. He also wanted to go out and wish for a good leg so he could walk. But there was such a crowd of people thronging under the tree, and they pushed him away. He couldn't get through. So he stood there and he watched. And he saw how the tree was making everybody miserable. The people who were wishing were miserable. The people who were thronging to get under the tree were miserable. The animals were suffering from all the wishing. And with that, he began to feel a well of compassion come from within him for all that suffering. And he lost the desire to wish. He became detached from the tree. And with that combination of compassion and detachment, he was the happiest of the lot. So that's where the story ends in the Veda. And then we have something called the Upanishads, which are commentaries on the Vedas, where they tell you what it is that they really told you in the Vedas. And in the Upanishads, they tell you that that wishing child and the watching child are inside each one of us. That is the duality within us. And the purpose of all meditation techniques is to discriminate between your watching child and your wishing child, so that you can observe your own wishing child. And to identify with your watching child, because that is the compassionate, detached part of yourself. And then in the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the scriptures of the Hindus, the same problem comes up again. Because Arjuna, who is the protagonist, goes to Krishna and he says, why should I fight the battle? Why should I wish under the tree? Why don't I just sit here and meditate upon you and I'll be happy? And Krishna says, no. You have to participate in the universe. You have to wish under the tree. And then he taught him how to wish. You see, the people who were wishing were miserable because they were standing under the tree and wishing for themselves. He said, if you go under the tree and you wish for the benefit of all, and you become detached from it, so you don't want to accept anything from the tree for yourself, then you'll be perfectly happy wishing under the tree, and everybody will be happy around you too. It is selflessness that is the highest form of selfishness. That is the pursuit of happiness. So it's something that we as vegans find out accidentally. I went vegan because I saw what was happening in the forest, and I said, I cannot live with myself if I continue doing this. So I gave up my dairy habit. Within a week, I had this huge sense of guilt lift off my shoulders. I didn't even know I had carried all that guilt all my life. And then within a month, all my arthritic pains went away. And I began to feel like a 16-year-old again. See, I had been suffering from arthritis since the year 2000. And I thought I had the same genetic makeup as my dad, who suffered from arthritis for the last 30 years of his life. But all along, it was a reaction to dairy. So even though I tried to do something for selfless reason, it turned out to be a very selfish act for myself, because I've never been healthier in my life. So the story, I mean, again, as far as the knowledge tree story in the Bible is concerned, I believe the same message is being sent to us in that story as well. Because they were banished from Eden because they ate the apple themselves. If they had plucked the apple and given it to the animals, maybe God would have let them be in Eden still. Because as far as at a species level, we are the only species that has access to this knowledge tree. So we should be wishing for the benefit of all other species and not for ourselves. So I consider this great transition that's going to happen as the metamorphosis, the transformation of the caterpillar to the butterfly. And you can see the parallels. Because you see, caterpillar is a blind consumer. The first thing he does when he comes out of the egg is to eat the shell of the egg he came out of. Then he eats the leaf that the egg was on. And he keeps eating for the next 2 weeks. But when the caterpillar becomes too big for his skin, he stops, builds a cocoon around himself, and meditates for a week. And within the cocoon, magical transformation is beginning to happen. New cells are born called imaginal cells. At first, the caterpillar's immune system thinks these imaginal cells are foreign cells and tries to fight them. And then the imaginal cells become more and more numerous. And the immune system gives up. Then the imaginal cells start clumping together. They form different organs of the butterfly. And when the butterfly comes out, she's a very discriminating consumer. She only sips nectar from flowers. And in the process, she pollinates the flowers, she regenerates life, and she undoes the damage that happened in the caterpillar phase. And I believe that we are in exactly the same transformation. And I'll show you evidence why I believe that. Clearly, this is a spiritual and cultural transformation that has to happen. So in 2012, this is at the COP17 in Durban, South Africa, we wrote an interfaith declaration on climate change, and almost every faith leader there signed it, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu. You see his signature there. And we presented it to Christiana Figueres, who is the executive secretary of the UNFCCC. And the lady who's doing the presentation is Ela Gandhi, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. And in that declaration, we had this 2-sentence addendum, which basically says, well, climate change is a symptom, the fever that our earth has contracted. The underlying disease is the disconnection from creation that plagues human societies. And we, the undersigned, pledge to heal this disconnection by promoting and exemplifying compassion for all creation in all our actions. And everybody signed it, saying it is part of their faith. Compassion for all creation is the foundation of all faiths. Selflessness is the foundation of all faiths. And then a week later, I got a call from Archbishop Tutu's secretary saying Desmond is very concerned about what he signed. Did he sign on to go vegan? Because he loves his chicken too much. When what we say and what we do are not in alignment, we suffer. Not only do we suffer, we cause suffering to others. So then I had to look at the way climate change is being framed today to see if we can tell a story where we did belong exactly as we are all along as human beings. The way the story of climate change is told is that CO2 levels have been going up and down for the last 3 million years between the glacial period and the interglacial periods. And in the current interglacial period, the Holocene era, human beings came along, and over the last 150 years, we messed it all up. We caused a huge increase in CO2, which you can see in the record. The CO2 now is at 400 parts per million. And as a result, now temperature is trying to catch up. But every time the CO2 levels go up and down and the temperatures go up and down, there is a lot of suffering that happens as animals have to move, they have to shrink in population. And then in the interglacial period, they have a few thousand years where they can expand in population. So there is this shrinking and expanding that happens. So each one of these gyrations causes a lot of suffering. So I want to now show you what really happened in the Holocene era, an alternate interpretation of it. So I'm showing you now a graph of our human CO2 emissions from 1850 to present, and the constituents of the CO2 emissions. So you can see it is caused by coal, oil, gas, cement, and land use. Land use is at the bottom. This is the deforestation and desertification that we do. And you will notice that at present, fossil fuels undoubtedly are the major contributors. 85% of it is coming from fossil fuel emissions. About 15% is coming from land use changes. But if you look to the left, you will notice that in 1850, land use change was the number one component of human-caused emissions. Now, it is not the CO2 that we're emitting today that matters, it's the CO2 that you've been emitting all along. You have to integrate it over time to see what is the major contributor of CO2 emissions from human contributions. So if you integrate it over time, from 1850 to present, you will see that land use change is the second highest, right behind coal, in terms of its total contribution. That is starting from 1850. But how long have we been deforesting? We have been deforesting for 10,000 years, not just since 1850. So Professor Radiman, University of Virginia, estimated that if you take into account all the land use change that human beings have done, then land use change is the number one contributor to human-caused CO2 emissions. In fact, it is greater than all other fossil fuel contributors combined. Now, this changes the story. He then looked at the ice core record and mapped out the CO2 in the atmosphere and the methane in the atmosphere for the last 10,000 years and compared it to previous interglacial period, that is the closest to our current interglacial period. So the previous interglacial period, it was going down like this, the CH4, and the CO2 was also going down like this. And in the current interglacial period, it matched the previous interglacial period until about 6,000 years ago, and then it deviated. So 6,000 years ago, it started going up, the CO2. And that's because of human deforestation. So in that sense, the world as we know it really did begin 6,000 years ago. Because we took over the atmospheric concentrations of gases as a species. So when you hear that Holocene era has had a remarkably constant temperature over the last 10,000 years, it wasn't by accident, it was because human beings did it. was our ancestors who did it by deforestation, unconsciously. I guess just like the elephant unconsciously contributes to the forest. So if you look at the temperature for the last 20,000 years, we came out of the glacial period and reached this interglacial period. And we were going to go back below glaciation threshold 5,000 years ago. Except because of all the deforestation and the animal agriculture that we had started, we kept the temperature constant instead. The actual trend is up here. This is what we should have been expecting. So until the industrial era, we caused this increase in temperature of A. And after the industrial era, we caused this increase in temperature of B. And according to Ruddiman's calculations, A is greater than B. Of course, since 1850, we have caused a huge rise in temperature of about 1 degree Celsius. And if we just project that we will keep doing what we are doing forever and ever, and we burn all the fossil fuels we have on Earth, we're going to crank up the temperature to that point, and then we're all going to die off, and then the Earth will get back to the glacial period. So this is a projection assuming whatever we are doing now, we'll keep continuing to do forever. But human activities today, human economy is 60% larger than what the planet can support already. We are bigger than the skin that we are in. So why would we continue to grow? So we have to change the story at this point. Transform from the caterpillar to the butterfly. But there is an explanation for what has happened so far. We kept the temperature constant for thousands of years through deforestation and through animal agriculture. And in the last 150 years, we have now created all the technology we need to maintain the temperature without deforestation. And now we have the ability to bring back the forests that we have destroyed. Because if you look at the global land carbon stock, the land carbon stock is high where the forests are, and it's low where the deserts are. And on land, there is 3 times as much carbon as in the atmosphere. So there is tremendous potential to sequester the carbon on land from the atmosphere. So you can see how the dense land carbon stock corresponds to the forests. This is the Amazon, this is the Congo, the 2 major tropical forests still left. But they're being eaten right now, as we speak, by our farmed animals. You can see the cows surrounding the Amazon, they're eating into it. You can see them surrounding the Congo. So as we expand our consumption of animal foods, more and more of these forests are being destroyed. And take a look at India. That's lacto-vegetarianism. Because India has about 600 million lacto-vegetarians. So now I want to give you an analogy of what is going on. Imagine that you're a weightlifter. You're lifting 5 times your weight above your head. You discover that you're on quicksand and you're sinking. Knowing that your weight alone is too much for the quicksand to bear, what is the first thing you should do? Drop the weight. So we know that 10,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago, the weight of all the wild animals, greater than 25 kgs in average weight, put together was 200 million metric tons. It's been fairly constant over the last 100,000 years. And human beings were a tiny little blip 10,000 years ago. But by 1970, the weight of human beings alone was equal to the weight of all the wild animals put together from 10,000 years ago. And on top of that, we were carrying twice as much in terms of weight of farmed animals. And the wild animals had decreased in weight by 60%. This is the total biomass I'm talking about. Then between 1970 and 2010, our population doubled. Our per capita consumption also doubled. So our overall impact on the planet quadrupled. And in those 40 years, 52% of all wild animals died in terms of weight. Now, if you take an exponential curve that is increasing by a factor of 4 in 40 years, and you extrapolate that out and say we're going to keep doing the same thing, how many years do we have left before we wipe them all off the face of the earth? And it turns out to be 16 years, by 2026. So when I made this calculation in 2014, this is from the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report, I was so shocked that I pledged to my granddaughter publicly that in 2026, when she is 16 years old, there will be more wild animals than when she was born in 2010. And I want to keep that pledge with all your help. We can do this. But that's not what the UN is planning to do. You see, I said that the weightlifter is lifting 5 times his weight. Our farmed animals weigh about 2.5 times our weight right now, but they are all young animals and they eat twice as much as their weight alone would indicate, because we kill them as soon as they reach puberty or less. So they are eating 5 times as much food as we do. Okay? So, but according to the UN, their plan, according to the UN FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization, the plan is to double livestock production by 2050. So by 2026, if we continue doing according to the UN plan, wild animals will disappear, our population will increase, and once wild animals disappear, our population will also start disappearing. Our necks are on the chopping block. Because we are now deploying high technology to go and catch the fish in the ocean. There aren't that many left. But the demand is still there, and the corporations have to meet the demand. So we have this artificial growth that we have created that causes this problem, But there is another UN organization called the UN Environmental Program, UNEP, that is predicting that by 2050, the whole world will be vegan. But this is not a good plan. This is the techno-split plan. This is the caterpillar thinking that he will remain a caterpillar forever. And there is an artificial growth that's causing this to happen. The growth is by first pouring toxins into the environment, and those toxins then get bioconcentrated in the animal foods we eat, and then convincing people that the higher up you go in the economic ladder, the more animal foods you have to eat, so that you get sicker and sicker as you go up in the food chain, go up in the economic ladder. and then you get fixed with pharmaceuticals. And more than 1 billion people are employed doing this to us. So once you have this growth with 1 billion people or more employed, there is no government on earth that's going to say, let's stop it. Because of the system that we have created. The system is based on competition and consumption and growth. So it's a systemic problem. The system rewards those who are selfish and greedy. So that's how selfishness and greed have become so common among us. So to solve this, you really have to change the system. First, drop the weight. Then you will suddenly have all the resources you need to bring back the wild animals. Because 35% of the land area of the planet currently is used to just graze animals, our animals. And on that land, if we just return the original forest that used to exist in 1800, we can actually sequester 265 gigatons of carbon on just 41% of that land, which is more than the 240 gigatons of carbon we have added to the atmosphere since 1750. We can literally reverse climate change just by bringing back the forests that used to exist in 1800. And of course, once you have a new system in which equality is built in and sustainability is built in, population will automatically start declining. And so we will reach a balance eventually. So we are, in that sense, the thermostat species for the planet. Because we kept the temperature constant for the last 10,000 years, and we're going to bring it back and keep it constant so that there's no more ice ages. And this transformation is already happening. This is what I call the butterfly story. It's already happening. Because as of 2010 in the US, 12% of millennials, 4% of Gen Xers, and 1% of baby boomers self-reported to be vegan. And you can see by the Google trend that since 2010, the interest in veganism has tripled. And it's tripled in all the rich countries of the world. So it's automatically happening. The imaginal cells are being born and they're growing in number. At first they were battled by the immune system of the planet, right? But now there are too many of us. And the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change in 2015 specifically asked all Hindus to go on a plant-based vegan diet. It's the first major religion declaration to do this. So it gives us great hope that when the religions of the world come together and start doing this, there is no stopping it. This is going to happen. And Buckminster Fuller said this. He said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. But you can build this new model in parallel with the current system. You have to build a new system in which equality and sustainability are built in, where we are not toxifying the land as we live. So we are planning to do something called the Sacred Lifeline Project in collaboration with universities, where we actually implement a small community, where we live in such a way that if the whole world lived like us, you would use no more than half the planet. So the other half can be given back to wildlife, and the forest can be brought back. So the first example I'm going to show you is for Colorado, in Crestone, Colorado. This is a plan for what it will look like. There's a few living clusters and some common areas. So in a more sustainable implementation of society, there'll be a lot more common areas than individual areas. So each cluster will have tiny homes, humble homes for families, and a common kitchen, a large kitchen where the community can come together. So the idea is to build community around food. And in between will be the greenhouse where we are growing our food. Because in Colorado, you will need it. Now, I have to tell you that I gave this talk in Costa Rica last week, and a gentleman said, let's do this in Costa Rica first. And he's offering 150 acres of land in the blue zone, which is where the centenarians in Costa Rica live. So it may happen there first because there are much less obstacles to it happening there than here. Of course, in Costa Rica, you don't need greenhouses. So here are some concepts of what it will look like on the entrance. Living units in open space with the plants in the middle. And that's my granddaughter now. And she loves to dance. And I've told her that on her 16th birthday, there'll be more wild animals than there were when she was born. And then she will be able to dance on her 16th birthday. And that's my mission in life. So the two books I have, I'm going to give a copy of this. I'm going to leave a copy of my two books here. The Dharma is about what is the right thing to do, and Yoga is how do you go about doing it. Anyway, thank you very much. I love it that I get an applause from other species as well.
As an educator, I know you have to wait 1 or 2 minutes. Asking a question.
Hi, thank you very much for that fabulous talk. My name is Camilo Marquez, and as you were speaking, I was thinking about the question of growth, and you said, if I remember correctly, that once the system is in place, population automatically decreases. So that's a huge condition.
Right.
And the system's not in place. We believe in growth. We're dedicated to it. We certainly don't believe in any kind of restrictions on reproduction. But clearly, that will be necessary for this system to operate. And, you know, I can't help but think of the paradox that your presentation of your beautiful granddaughter presents. You know, we're not going to be able to have such beautiful granddaughters if we're going to survive the dilemma that we're facing. And growth has to, at a minimum, come to zero, and probably, you know, go below that. So just, you know, how do we address those seeming paradoxes and challenges?
Right. No, that's a very good question. You know, we have to have some feedback in our system to encourage a decrease in population over time. So we have been thinking about a currency system which is tied to the ecological footprint on Earth, so that we can restrict the overall ecological footprint to half the Earth, and then distribute that ecological credit equally to everyone. And as the population increases, everyone will get less and less credits. So the credits can be distributed to people automatically every 50 minutes right now. And as you start getting it once every 51 minutes, you start questioning, why are we having more children? Okay? That's one mechanism for putting feedback in the system. The other is also equality automatically reduces population. The more equal a society is, the less population, in fact, the population starts decreasing in our current system. We know that. This is why in France, Now they have incentives for women to have more children. So when I talk to people in the villages of India who are having more of the children, and I ask them, why do you have this many children? They tell me it's because of security. They don't know who's going to take care of them when they grow old. Whereas in the cities of India, where the average income is higher, there is a decrease in population. People are automatically having less than 2 kids per family. So I really think that there is a mechanism that's already built into us. The more equal we are as a society, the more secure we feel, and the less we are impelled by other circumstances like growth.
Good.
Well, that's most inspiring. Thank you. 2 questions. One question that's about, it's not quite clear how the population, the world population, not just for these countries, Europe and Japan, but the world population. The second thing is, all of this sounds so revolutionary, and it reminded me of Ashoka, who I believe was the first emperor ever, and perhaps still the only emperor, who forbade, issued an edict forbidding royal hunt. So this was 250 BC, around 250 BCE, so it's
right.
Over 2,000 years ago. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, the transformation of the caterpillar to the butterfly is revolutionary or evolutionary. It is a massive change in human society we are talking about. But I think we have the capacity to do it. We all have the motivation to do it, because I've never heard someone say, I want to destroy the planet and go to Mars. And so it's up to us to figure out how to do it and put it in place. There are a lot of things that have happened that have been driven by the grassroots. Gandhi's revolution was driven by the grassroots, where he got people to just change their clothes and brought the British Empire to its knees in 12 years in the Khadi movement. And we are also in an era where changes are happening very fast. So we have a tendency to think that whatever has happened to us so far will keep happening forever, but we forget that just in the last 20 years, so many things have changed. When I was working on the internet in 1995, there was an article in Newsweek saying the internet is going nowhere. Who's going to buy things on the internet? Who's going to read newspapers on the internet? And within 10 years, I overheard someone say, I cannot live without the internet. There was a massive nonlinear phase transition that happened in human society. And in 2005, someone told me that gay marriage will never happen. And by 2015, it was normal. And then in 2015, I made a presentation at the AGU about the lifestyle carbon dividend, which is how much carbon gets sequestered if the whole world goes vegan. And I showed them that we can reverse climate change if we did that. And the climate scientist came to me and he said, this will never happen. And I said to him, by 2025, this is going to be normal.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just want to talk about certain little details, okay? First of all, I take a long-scale view. I'm a dentist and know a little bit about paleoanthropology. And 10,000 years ago, the introduction of agriculture wasn't just farm animals. It was farming in general. And the pyramid builders in Mexico, for instance, when they started farming, they had less robust people than the hunter-gatherers around. Hunter-gatherers presumably ate mostly vegetable mass, but they ate some animals. So kind of the fall from Eden occurred, so to speak, with the introduction of agriculture in general, not just. And if you look at Weston Price, you see that native cultures had wonderful facial form and facial development when they were eating whatever their native diets are, which were mixtures of animals and vegetable matter. But when you had introduced refined grains, you started getting a fall from health. And so then you have this agriculture in the equation, not just the farm animal. Now, the farm animal is a huge percentage of the deforestation, but when you factor in your solution, shouldn't you also factor in, if you eliminated all farm animals, you'd have to do some kind of a fudge factor to compensate for the additional farmland needed for growing vegetables and things like that too. So yeah,
Right.
that's the crux of this.
So the way we did the calculation, this was actually done with Professor Atul Jain of the University of Illinois and his student Shiji Shu. The way we did the calculation was, if we looked at the IPCC AR5, Fifth Assessment Report, Working Group 3, Chapter 11, there is a land use block diagram that tells you how land is being distributed today. And 35% of the land area of the planet is used just to graze animals. 10% of the land area of the planet is used to grow crops. And urban area is just 2%. Okay? And from the cropland, half the cropland output is going to feed animals. Okay? And also, I think all the crop residues are also going to feed animals. So overall, if you look at how much we are extracting from the earth to feed animals, that's 5 times the food that we eat. Okay? So if you just, instead of feeding the animals, if you eat it straight, you have plenty for us to eat. Right? So this is why we said all the grasslands can be used to return forests. And that's why we did the calculation. And even then, when we looked at the forests in 1800, only 41% of that land used to be forests in 1800. The other 59% were deforested before 1800. So we don't have a record of that. So even in that, just that 41%, we are sequestering 265 gigatons of carbon. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your inspiring talk. I've learned a lot, and I have lots of things to research further later. As we speak here, are present now, the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly is meeting in New Orleans. And tomorrow, they will be voting on just discussing the possibility of giving inherent worth and dignity to a species other than human. Mm-hmm. And today, it was supposed to happen, but it was really in those of us who would like to see our community open up to accepting ourselves in a multi-species world. It's to our favor for it to be tabled tomorrow, but it's very threatening. It was very clear today with the pros and the cons and the people who were really upset that we were putting animal rights and other beings' rights, or even considering their inherent worth or dignity above human. And so it seems like we keep revisiting this human exceptionalist paradigm from which is deeply ingrained in our culture. And I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom when you are confronted with people who are very much human exceptionalist and kind of don't give a rat's ass about the other species out there.
Well, I mean, even though they may not be too concerned about what's happening to other species, they're concerned about the environment. At least they make it clear that they're concerned about the environment. And to me, the environment is other species. Other species plus minerals. Okay? So, if our relationship with the environment is determined by a relationship with other species, this is why animal rights is an environmental issue. I mean, the dignity of animals is an environmental issue. And you should show them this, the weightlifter's problem. It makes it very clear. It's silly for us not to do it, not to drop the weight. It's silly for us to argue how much weight we should still be carrying. We are on ecological quicksand. We don't have too much time. I tell people, you're going to go vegan whether you like it or not. It's going to happen, okay? It's up to you to choose whether you do it in year 1, year 2, or year 9. It's going to happen. If we wait till year 9, if all of us wait till year 9 before we do it, we will have a much, much harder problem of bringing back the earth. Okay? So the sooner we do it, the easier our task will be. But ultimately, life is going to win. Eden will come back.
These are such great questions. Who has the next question? Right here.
Thanks. That was super inspiring, and your optimism is very contagious. And it almost made me forget that I read the news before I came here. And I know you probably have an answer for this, but if I read what's going on in the world, veganism and farmland is really not on anyone's mind.
No.
And how do you see that changing in the short time limit you've given it?
Right. It's not on anyone's mind among those who control the news, because they are about growth. Okay? So it's not on their mind. We know that. This is why we did Cowspiracy. And in Cowspiracy, we could see that every environmental organization we spoke to didn't want to talk about it. Even though, if you're a scientist and you're addressing ecosystems collapse and biodiversity loss and climate change, the first thing you should do is to go vegan. That's the only thing that you can do that will address all of them simultaneously. Right? But they don't do that. In fact, at the AGU in 2015, when I presented the paper, guess what the main course at the banquet dinner was? Steak. And that's why they cannot imagine it happening. So I've stopped looking at the news. I'm more focused on building something new. Building this new model. This is how we did the internet also. We worked on this in parallel with the voice network. We didn't want to just tag on to the voice network. We built it in parallel, and we built it to the distributed architecture, where there is no big boss computer that tells all the other computers how to route the data. It's a completely distributed, non-hierarchical system, the internet. This is why it's so robust. And that's what we should be building among ourselves. Let's build ourselves in parallel and let them play with themselves.
I think there was a question over here. Did I see a hand raised? You and then you.
So that community, the Sacred Lifeline Project, I want to live somewhere like that. And you're saying things come from the grassroots, and we don't have to worry about what other people are doing. And you said you were in Costa Rica, and someone said, well, let's do that here first. I mean, there's lots of great people here in Portland who are already vegan,
right,
who I feel like would want to do that with me.
Right.
Is there a good way to bring people together in different communities who are already thinking
Absolutely.
this way to do it faster?
Absolutely.
And
my
I'd
goal is to
invest
just,
what I have.
I love you. The idea is to trigger this conversation so that we are talking about the transition, we are talking about the new model, and not worrying about what's happening there. Let's work on this. We know what we need to do. We have to build the software and the hardware infrastructure for this so that we can do a measure our ecological footprint and make sure that we are within less than half the earth. So there's a lot of infrastructure that we need to build for the new system. So I want to trigger that conversation, and I want us to be enthusiastic about building it. Yes. Go for it. So it has to be, one thing I would say is the new system has to be completely open source so that it's all public domain knowledge that anybody can copy and use, right? And it has to be based on individual privacy and institutional transparency. The opposite of what we have today.
One of the most popular modern arguments against veganism is that we would be losing food security by not utilizing pasture and grazing lands. Mm-hmm. And in doing my own personal research, I found that in North America, approximately 50% of those lands are actually cultivatable. And it's also possible to transform those into permaculture farms, which produce fruits, nuts, and seeds. But I was wondering if you had any statistics globally about how much of grazing or pasture lands is cultivatable.
Right. The integrated science assessment model that Professor Atul Jain uses has all the nitrogen and phosphorus data for for every part of the earth, so they can assess how much can come back in each area of the planet, based on the depletion that we've already done. And then, of course, we have to rebuild all that, because we have taken things and we have flushed it down into the ocean. So we have to start rebuilding all that. But we have work to do for sure. That's why there are 7.4 billion of us, But it's much easier to do this here than to do it on Mars.
I think we have time for one more question. I see a hand at the back. Good.
Thank you so much for your talk. I saw What the Health. I believe you were a producer of that.
Right.
It was stunning. I've been vegan for 44 years, and the reason is I got sober in Los Angeles, and the macrobiotic diet was there offered by, Michio Kushi. And I've been in animal rights ever since, but because I do see the news, I saw that alcoholism has increased 400% in Great Britain. Addictions to illegal and legal medications are increasing exponentially. So I think human beings are becoming more fragile than the earth in a certain way. I see lots of vegans because I'm on Facebook and we connect that way. And in the gym where I exercise, I put the literature around, and a woman came to me and said, because of the literature, I went vegan. And so, we want to be make a change in the earth, but I hope it isn't hopeless. I want to keep working for it, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. And now we can continue our talks right over in the Channing Room for the reception. Please join us there.